You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host of BioTalk. And as you know, we interview leaders within the biohealth industry within our region, nationally and internationally. And we have a special guest this week. We have someone who has been one of the original biotech entrepreneurs in Montgomery County, Maryland, I think. And we're going to learn more about that as we get into this discussion with Dr. Carol Nacy, who is the CEO and founder of Sequella, and someone who is one of the first biotech entrepreneurs I met when I got involved in Montgomery County, Maryland with biohealth innovation. And I want to welcome Carol to BioTalk. Carol?
I'm very pleased to actually be able to see you, Rich. It's been a long time since we've clinked wine glasses at the CEO dinners, and I really miss that contact.
Yeah, I do too. And, unfortunately, our virtual bioforum in October was a little different than being at AstraZeneca with all of those people that we all knew and would love to have a chat with and a drink, Carol, but maybe 2021 sometime.
Yes.
We will get to a new norm, which will include some personal interaction.
That will be very exciting.
Yes, I can't wait for it. So, but in the meantime, while I've got you and we can look at each other, which is nice, we'd like to introduce you to our listeners. And best way to do that is for you to talk a little bit about your personal background and history.
My first foray into industry was actually at Ontremed. Ontremed was started by several different people, some of whom were from Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. And I was actually running a department there. And they asked if I would help them design their science. And I took a 3-year sabbatical from Walter Reed to do that, came to build Ontremed out, and liked it so much that I actually left Walter Reed altogether and became a serial entrepreneur. So my background is in microbiology and immunology. My most favorite thing in the entire world is bacteria. So, yeah, I know.
Which we're trying to avoid these days.
Yes, we're trying to avoid viruses. Well,
Yes.
I've never had a fondness for viruses, but
Right.
Nonetheless, I left Ontremed a little bit after the public offering. I was lucky that the chair of the board and the president of the corporation brought me along with the public offering. So I was able to experience that. And then we went public and we truncated our infectious diseases and became something quite different, an oncology company. So I left to start Sequella. And then I actually loaned myself out for 2 years to a company in California, commuted from DC every week. My job there was to revamp the science and get that company acquired, which we did in a little less than 2 years. And I came back to begin building out Sequella.
And where did you get the idea for Sequella, and what was the base technology that you founded the company on?
It actually came from the National Institutes of Health. When I left Walter Reed to go to Ontremed, about 2 years in, the National Institutes of Health asked me to be on a panel to review the previous 5 years granting program for tuberculosis and to forecast what they should be funding in the future. It was such an interesting meeting for me because I'd been at Walter Reed at that time about 17 years, I guess, and I'd never heard the word tuberculosis. So I thought this would be like a half-day meeting, right? Then they scheduled a 3-day meeting and I was completely shocked. And then the statistics started rolling out on the first day of that meeting. And I realized there were 10 million cases of TB every year, and 2 million deaths. It was the number one killer of women of childbearing age, the number one killer of HIV infected people. I was shocked. So I left there with the idea that I should think about tuberculosis as a global health menace that had no one paying attention to it. Clearly, the drugs were 40 years old. The vaccine was 100 years old. The diagnostic was even older than that. That was sort of the genesis of how I got the idea for Sequella. And then it was just a question of persuading people that even though TB is not a particular problem in the US, we have now learned with COVID, if you don't cure the problem everywhere, you have a problem whether you think you have it or not. So then we went out and created some founders, created the company, and we've been off and running for the last, as you kindly mentioned to me, 23 years.
23 years. 23 years as a bio entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur, because as you mentioned, Entremed was the first.
Right.
You were involved in the founding team there, which is now Cassie, right, or Classy, as however they pronounce it. But it's survived. But that's the route that a lot of the companies in our region have gone, is they've been acquired, they've been rebranded, they pivoted, they've become something else other than what they began. But Sequella has not changed its name. It's had the same CEO for 23 years. And so what do you attribute the longevity to for Sequella at this point, Carol?
I think really the mission of the company is so important on a global basis that we've been able to bring in incredibly bright people to put their minds to finding solutions to the problems that the world is facing, specifically with TB, but also with other bacteria that we work on. We've been able to discover, I had two fabulous women chemists who came up with several drugs, one of which has finished a registration trial in Russia. And we're bringing that to the FDA, hopefully to have accelerated registration. And that was a drug that we discovered in-house and brought all the way through to a phase 3 study. We've had other compounds that are now in phase 2 in Africa, starting a clinical trial in about 2 weeks, dose escalation trial of our second compound, which is a new antibiotic also focused on TB. And we have a third drug that works on diarrheal disease. That's the number one infectious disease in the United States. That's Clostridium difficile.
So you founded the company around tuberculosis. You're still there today, but you mentioned other bacteria. So there's other things that you've increased in your pipeline of research that Sequella is focused on. What are some of those other areas?
We're still very focused on diseases of the developing countries. So we have drugs that will work on a parasitic infection that I happen, by the way, to work on at Walter Reed.
Wow.
Leishmaniasis, right? And also a bacteria that causes ulcers in people. And you will be surprised to know that 50% of the world is infected at the moment. So it's a huge problem, but it's a major problem in Asia because it is one of the necessary factors for gastric cancer. So it's an inducer of gastric cancer with, I think, a genetic background and an environmental insult. So we're working on a drug that's in phase 2 for Helicobacter pylori also.
Wow. And as you look at the history of the company, if you look at what you would consider your major success to point, at this point, what are you most proud about?
I'm thrilled that our drug that we discovered in-house, SQ109, has been so successful in clinical trials and is so safe by comparison to the other TB drugs that are out there. Literally no serious adverse events in any of the clinical trials that we've done. We've also worked in partnership with a number of groups globally. It really does take a village to raise a TB drug, I have to say. Without the assistance of the National Institutes of Health, the European Union EDCTP program, our colleagues in South Africa, Tanzania, Mozambique, we probably could not have done what we've done on the small amount of cash that we've raised.
And how do you find that you can get attention for something when you have so many other competing interests today, like CAR T and cell therapy, immunotherapy, and oncology, and you're still trying to focus on some third world diseases in third world countries? How do you get the attention you need to keep the spirit going with this company? And then how do you find the strategic partners you need to grow?
It's not simple. Antibiotics are a huge problem worldwide. We're having an antibiotic resistance crisis globally. There have been at least 4 bankruptcies of public antibiotics companies here in the United States. So funding is very, very difficult for companies doing what we do. But the need is so great that there are other ways in which we can bring together people to get the job done. So we've worked with corporate partner in Russia. We've worked with clinical trial groups and in the European Union to move these drugs forward. We have partnerships in South Africa. And with all of that, we're able to do what we need to do to move the drugs forward. Unfortunately, it takes longer if you do it this way than it would if someone came along and gave you, $150 million. Oh my God.
Yeah, right. So you're still really at a clinical stage, and
Correct.
you're getting closer to commercialization than you've ever been. So
that's true.
How close are you, and what's it going to take to get over this last major hurdle?
What we're looking for now is the funding to bring our drug SQ109 to the FDA in an end of phase 2 meeting. All of the TB drugs that have been registered in the US to date have been accelerated registrations where you are allowed to market and sell your product while you complete your phase 3 clinical trial. It's essentially a phase 4 program. So I believe we have sufficient safety data and efficacy data for this drug to bring it to the FDA, but it does take a fair amount of money to sort through all of the data, get it ready in a briefing package, and do all the work that you need to do to bring the drug to the FDA. And that's what we're raising capital for at the moment. We raise capital privately. We're not a public company, so
Right.
We don't have restrictions on discussing things. So that's where we are now. We're in the middle of clinical trials for our second drug. That also, I have enough grant support for that to bring it through to an accelerated phase 2B registration trial. And we're just pushing forward on all fronts.
So at the end of the day, the non-dilutive funding that you're getting from the grants has been extremely important to Sequella's history.
Absolutely. And the relationship with investigators at the National Institutes of Health and in academic centers all over this country has just been incredibly important. And I feel like there's been literally hundreds of scientists who've been working with us to make sure that these drugs actually, because they're safe and they're effective, to make sure that they actually get to the patients that need them.
Has your NIH relationship been distracted at all because of all of the attention everybody is focused on COVID-19 at this time?
It's really interesting because a lot of the program managers are actually grateful to have something besides COVID to read. So they've been very helpful, encouraging about getting grants in to do other things as well. But there has been a huge emphasis on COVID.
Right. And then when you talk about the FDA, the FDA is very mysterious to a lot of people that don't happen to be within 30 minutes of it, but you're very close to them. Is the proximity to the FDA and your business, is there any advantage to that versus someone who's in California trying to do the same thing you're doing?
I think the only real advantage is that you can go in person to the meetings that they have on other drugs. You can see them in action. And also, there are some people that were postdocs in my lab that are now at the FDA. So I know that they're actually people.
Real people.
Real people, yes.
Yeah. And right now, I would imagine, though, all of that interaction is virtual rather than in person, correct?
Yeah, it's frustrating in that sense. And I feel very bad for them that they've had such an influx of things that they've had to look at critically in such a short period of time. The good news is that everybody came together to try to figure out solutions to COVID. The bad news is that it all lands on their lap in the end.
Right.
So they've been very, very busy, and God bless them.
And what I've asked other CEOs of pharma and bio companies is that what impact has COVID had on your operations directly?
I spent from March until July in Delaware hiding from COVID because I am not young, interestingly, and nor is my husband.
Right. Right. I think we share that trait.
We might share that trait.
Right.
But in any case, we basically shut down to make sure that our staff was protected from getting the virus and that they were going to remain healthy. We reopened in July. And so one of the things that has impacted us is that the clinical trial of our second drug, which will start in the next before December. We just had a call this morning. Everything is on track for first patient in, and I'm very excited about that. But that was supposed to start in April in South Africa and Tanzania, and it's been postponed at least 3 times so far. And to keep the grant support going, keep the people funded in order to be able to start this clinical trial has been an interesting tour de force by the grant holder, which is a wonderful clinician out of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. So I give him so much credit for having spent all of this time keeping everybody's head above water while we wait for the clinical trial to start. And we just spend money, just sitting.
Right. I
In
understand.
that sense, it has certainly impacted our business because we can't make the same kind of headway when everything is shut down worldwide. On the other hand, I'm working with someone who who has a new diagnostics company and is making a very novel antibody detection system. And I'm excited about that. And I also am on the board of a company that was an immuno-oncology company that had pivoted to COVID and now has a vaccine that's starting clinical trials. So I've been fortunate to have a peripheral role in COVID. And I'm very pleased that I didn't have a major role because it really is a difficult disease to have to deal with.
It sure is. But one of the things that you've mentioned to me is the impact that COVID has on other infectious diseases, including tuberculosis, which a lot of people don't know about. So maybe you could expound on that.
Well, I mean, the problem with sequestration and people not being able to see their physicians one-on-one means that diagnosis lags. And for every person who has TB, it's very much like COVID. It's aerosol transmitted. It's a lung disorder. Many of the symptoms that people go through are the same. So to distinguish between COVID and TB or flu is difficult. And if you can't bring the person into the clinic, then they don't also get the appropriate care. For every infected individual who goes untreated, they infect 15 additional people per year that they go untreated. So we've had now 9 months of people not being diagnosed correctly, people who are unable to get their medications. We're seeing an upswing in both infections worldwide. We now have over 10 million. So when I started Sequella, there were 8 million new patients every year. Now we're up to 10.5 million new cases. In part, that's because of this phenomenon of if you don't treat the person, they, by aerosol, transmit their disease to others. And so that's kind of an exponential creep. And we don't have enough diagnostics like COVID. We don't have enough drugs that work and work efficiently. And so we're seeing a huge upswing right now. And the World Health Organization is very concerned about that.
We're fortunate to have people like you that are not just chasing the almighty dollar, but also understand that there's a need to address things in the world, especially in a lot of the emerging countries, that people in America don't have to contend with on a day-to-day basis to the same extent.
Right. So let me give you some statistics in the US for TB, which I think should be eye-opening. So we have about 10,000 cases in a year. About 70% of those are in people who are US citizens who were born elsewhere.
Okay.
Acquired their infection outside the country. But we test somewhere between 300,000 to 450,000 people every year for latent TB. That is TB where just like those people who got it elsewhere and weren't sick for years now came down with it. These people have latent TB. We test everybody in prison systems, in nursing homes, in hospitals once a year for latent tuberculosis. And we find 300 to 400,000 people with latent TB that are then treated prophylactically. We're one of the few countries in the world that has what's called a TB elimination program, where we go out and do contact tracing like they're trying to do for COVID. The whole system for contact tracing is for STDs and tuberculosis here in the United States. So we identify people who've been exposed and we treat them early, which is why we're under control. Outside the US, they have TB control programs, which means you have to self-identify with symptoms, and then they test you and then treat you. So in the meantime, you've been busily spreading your infection to everybody you talk to or sit in an elevator with or sit on a bus with. So
yeah. What's amazing, though, is if you have this history and you know how to control in the United States, and it's very similar to COVID, how come that parallel wasn't incorporated in the way we were going to attack COVID?
Well, those of us who know anything about TB were surprised that it wasn't. I mean, CDC has contact tracing capability. If we had done this in the very beginning, I think we would have been in much better shape.
Maybe things might change in 2021, I hope.
I hope.
Yeah, we have 2 promising vaccines and maybe 2 or 3 more on the horizon, some coming right from our companies right here in Montgomery County.
I know. Isn't that exciting?
That's really exciting. And to see the about $6 billion worth of warp speed money come into AZ and GSK and Novavax and Emergent right in our own backyard is actually giving more attention to our region and making people aware of how important our region is to the world in the biohealth industry.
Oh, this is probably the best place in the entire world to be. Montgomery County, Prince George's County. I mean, Maryland is a great place to work, as you know.
Yes, I know. Yes. And we're trying to educate more people about that. So, and then one of the other things is you sent me a report talking about recent findings that 1 in 7 patients hospitalized with COVID has acquired a secondary infection. And those that acquired that infection, 50% of them have died. That's another fact which is not well known by people.
Well, and, I think anytime you have people in intensive care, they are in such dire straits that any infectious pathogen is going to be a problem for them. So, yes, it is very clear for those of us who are in the anti-infective space that the misuse of antibiotics early on to prevent that from happening is now resulting in some resistance development that we did not expect. So some of our antibiotics that we really rely on in hospital are going to be less effective going forward simply because of COVID and because of the necessity of making sure that people who are so ill, especially when they can't breathe, making sure that they don't also pick up a secondary infection that is more lethal even than the virus itself.
Well, it seems with your experience that you've had over the few years that you've been working in this industry, that expertise would be appreciated by other people that could take advantage of it. So how do you share your knowledge and this wealth of experience you have, Carol, that can address some of the other underlying problems we have in America and around the world?
How would you like me to share that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, how can we get the word out that you have some wisdom that could be shared with other people? I don't know if people are aware of that.
Well, I don't know if they're aware of it either. I do lecture. I do mentor people. We have actually, once we brought both of our lead drugs into the clinic, we had to slow down the R&D. We actually incubate a lot of little companies. We have 5 little companies in Sequella. And it's fun to have them because they're all working on very different things. Nobody's working on infectious diseases but us. And so we learn a lot. That's part of science is having a critical mass of people. And they don't have to be all in the same field. In fact, it's better if they're not, because that's the ideas back and forth, just asking a question that you might not have thought of yourself because you're so familiar with your discipline.
A lot of people don't understand the mentoring and the incubation aspects of it because there aren't as many companies doing what you're doing that have the capability to do it. So, within our region. And I became aware of your mentoring when one of the companies BHI took on originally, which maybe you might have introduced us to back in the day, was Matt Mulvay and Katie, who you gave some incubation space or a bench at Sequella when they moved down from NYU in New York City.
Matt actually knew my son, who's a documentary filmmaker, who was living in New York City. And when Matt was getting his PhD, he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do. So he actually came down and worked at Sequella, and I had him work with Katie. She came from Johns Hopkins right out of her PhD. Wasn't sure she wanted to do bench science, was very sure she wanted to do something in science. And she actually came to me many years back and primarily to write, as part of what we do as scientists is write. And she's very good at it. So Katie and Matt worked at Sequella for a while, but like all companies where there's serial entrepreneurs that are working in the company, you breed more serial entrepreneurs. And Matt had the idea that his PhD thesis might become something important. And we encouraged him to move in that direction. Part of what we need to do as scientists is make sure that other scientists have their day in the sun, have their opportunity to find something really important. And so he got the entrepreneurial bug, as did Katie, and they took off and built their company. And lo and behold, they did a great job.
So, I mean, we're talking about Benavir, which was acquired
Yes.
by the Janssen division of J&J.
Absolutely.
But I didn't realize you were a matchmaker too. So you actually introduced the two of them. They ended up getting married, formed a company.
2 children.
And 2 children.
I think of them as my grandchildren.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. You should be a proud grandmother, but you know.
I am so proud of them.
Mhm.
They're both terrific people to begin with, great scientists, good thinkers. They've just done such a great job. And I'm still in contact with Matt. We work on a project that he had when he was here, which we call Be Smart. And so we have a grant for that, and he's working with me. So I get to talk to him, and I get to see pictures of the kids.
Well, that's cool. I mean, and a lot of people wish that they had met Matt when you did and could have been investors in his company.
Yes,
But so
I'm sure.
And if you have 5 more of them you're incubating now, I'd like to meet them, because who knows whether they're going to be the next Matt Mulvay.
Yeah, it's true. There are some really spectacular people in there.
Well, let's find a way that we get to know them, because most people don't know that you're incubating to the extent that you are with 5 entrepreneurial companies, and maybe they could get some more exposure. We could do maybe we could do a little panel discussion with your incubators and you on BioTalk and give them exposure, right?
Yeah, sure. They
If
would
they're
love
ready,
it.
if they're ready for prime time, I'd love to do that. So that's
I have a couple that are really amazing, and they're growing leaps and bounds. One I think is probably going to leave in February or March because they got a DoD grant that's huge. And
super.
They're an engineering company, so they'll probably leave. And God bless. This is how we do this.
Oh, that's right.
Right.
Graduation is the key to success in incubation. So yeah, that means it opens up a space for someone else to come into your fold.
Right.
So anyway, that's really neat. And I think the listeners would be glad to know that you're probably one of the original mentoring incubation facilities before they actually had incubators in Montgomery County for people to go to. So congratulations on that. And thank you for giving back to people.
No, thanks. This is all part of science. It's how we do business.
Yep. And
The
so
business of science.
you mentioned Maryland a little bit, and Montgomery County and Prince George's and the whole region. So how has this region been for you to, grow your career, try to grow your business, compared to you work with people around the world in other parts of the United States that you get to compare the biohealth capital region to those regions. So how is this region ranked for you?
So I love Montgomery County. I love being there. They're so supportive. And the state of Maryland has been incredibly supportive of Sequella and every company that has come out of Sequella. So I always tell people, come to Maryland. My California company was in Redwood City, just south of San Francisco. And what I can say is that there is a very different view of life there. I don't ever stop thinking of science. I think probably I spend at least 16 hours a day either thinking, doing, or writing. In California, I was completely shocked because people would sort of tootle in around 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, having already done yoga and sailed their sailboat for several hours. And I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, they would leave at 4:30 to play tennis. And I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
So we have a very East Coast attitude here in Maryland. And what I have tried to explain to my children and to all of the scientists that work for me and the ones that have gone on to be entrepreneurs is you can always sleep when you retire. By the way, I'm never retiring.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
If your science is part of your life, there is no work-life balance. You don't have to worry about it that way. I have 5 children. They all made it through their teenage years. They're married. They have children of their own. It is possible to do just about everything that you need to do and still be a devoted scientist and really enjoy your life.
Well, you're living proof of that, Carol. So
I'm old proof of that.
Yeah. We're talking with Carol Nacy, who's the CEO and founder of Sequella and a serial entrepreneur here in the biohealth capital region, and also a mentor of emerging, hopefully successful entrepreneurs in our industry. So tell us a little bit about your vision. What's your long-term vision for your personal life and Sequella, since they sort of blend together?
They do.
Yeah.
My long-term vision for Sequella is that we will get our drugs to the patients that need them. We will build a following for those drugs. And then I think someone with global distribution should pick us up. We are lucky in that TB is a very different kind of antibiotic than the normal. TB antibiotics you can find about 70% of all patients with 2 distribution centers. One is the Global Fund for the World Health Organization, and the other is the CDC. There are TB control programs in every single country of the world, and those TB control programs report to the World Health Organization. Our TB elimination program is run out of the CDC. So between those 2 distribution centers, we can get our drugs to the majority of patients that need them, especially in developing countries. But I think if we were going to widely distribute our drug, we would want to work with a larger pharmaceutical company. What we're really good at is interesting science. And we know what we're good at. What we don't know anything about is marketing and sales, because that's not our strength. And I think in our industry, we need to begin to think about segregating our industry into those people who do the high-risk R&D, which is like Sequella, those who transform that into products with late-stage clinical trials, and then those that do marketing and sales. There are lots of little companies out there that do incredible science. What we need to do is find a way to pass that science upstream.
I understand. It seems to be one of the biggest gaps is finding commercialization partners, because you're right. We're rich with science in our region. And then the commercialization lags because we haven't had as many commercial products get out of the good science and research that we have in the region. And, MedImmune has been one that's been extremely successful, and Supernus. And, there's a number of companies that are emerging now where they've achieved that success. But there are so many more like yourself that are on the cusp, but just need the right partner or the right breakthrough or the right resources or the right network to get to the next step.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'm going to close with, what can we do to help you get to your ultimate goal, Carol?
My ask is always that you consider antibiotics and the antibiotic resistance issues going forward. If we lose our antibiotics, which we are currently doing one by one, we are not going to be able to do surgery. We're not going to be able to treat oncology. We can't do any of our modern medicines without antibiotics. And we need to pay attention to antibiotic resistance as it is developing worldwide, because once it develops someplace else, it is just a matter of time before it comes here and spreads. Antibiotic resistance is not a game. It's not fun. And it's really critical. So on the ask side, I ask people to think about when you go to your pediatrician with your child who has a cold, don't ask for an antibiotic. It doesn't work against a virus. So you need to pay attention to the use of antibiotics in your own home, use of antibiotics in feed animals, and recognize that we create the environment that enables antibiotic resistance to develop, and we're in control. We can fix this problem. And in the meantime, if you can, invest in Sequella or invest in
Okay, there we go.
Yes.
I was going to say you have an unselfish answer, as you typically do from your scientific background, but finally you had an ask.
Right.
You have to ask for the order sometimes, Carol. So,
Well, yeah,
so the key is you are open for investment, I guess. I
absolutely.
mean, you would look for some private investors.
We have about 200 private investors now. We've raised about $108 million,
Right?
about 2-to-1 grants to investment. And $108 million is not a lot to bring 2 drugs through to phase 2 from scratch.
No. And from an equity standpoint, leveraging equity dollars 2-to-1 with non-dilutive money is very good for your investors.
Right, exactly. And my investors all have essentially double bottom lines. They believe in the science. They believe in me as a scientist. And I do have a good scientific background. And they want to make money. I want to make money.
Right.
But we want to make money by doing something really important for the world.
Yeah. You want to make money by doing good.
Yes,
Yep.
That's true.
Okay. So not a bad mission. So at the end of the day, hopefully, if there's anybody listening to this great story and the great science and passion that Carol Nacy has to help the world, how would they get a hold of you, Carol?
Carol Nacy at Sequella.com, or my cell phone, which is on my emails. So.
Okay. So easily accessible. So
I am always available.
Yes. Yes, you are, especially when you're working 18 hours a day, 24/7.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for chatting with us. I've learned a lot. I thought I knew you, but I didn't really know you until we went into in depth here about some of the things you're involved with. And also, I love what you're trying to do to give back with your mentoring and incubation of emerging life science and biotech entrepreneurs in our region. So we'd like to give them some notoriety as well as yourself. So we'll follow up with that as an action item.
That sounds great.
I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we'll come back next year, do this again, and talk about how you've achieved some of your critical milestones that are your goals.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you too. And we've been visiting with Carol Nacy, who's the CEO and founder of Sequella, and wish her the best of luck in the future. Carol, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.